Good evening. I'm calling to order the Board of Directors business meeting for Thursday, July 11th, 2019. Would you all please rise for the flag salute?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
General Counsel, would you please call the roll?
Vice President Hines.
Here.
Director Winskill.
Here.
Director Leon.
Here.
Director Cobb.
Here.
And is Director Vial excused?
Director Vial is excused. Item number 4, adoption of the agenda.
I move adoption.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries 4-0. Item number 5, recognition of staff, students, and community. We have no recognitions this evening. Item number 6, superintendent's report. 6.1, the 2019-2020 budget recommendation.
So I've asked Rosalind to come back one more time. She's getting to be a famous person in the city and have go over the budget. We decided that Director Leon came and said that he'd gotten some information from the community that there were people that were concerned, that they still had a budget concern. They felt like they hadn't had enough time to look at it and decide whether there a lot of has to do with some of the cuts that we had to make. And so there is a specific group of best practices that you use when you're being transparent about the project budget. And I've asked Rosalind to go over theirs, but I want you to really focus on this first agenda item because I think it's real important and it'll help to address those people that still have concerns. So what we're asking the board to do tonight is to adopt the agenda. So let's talk a little bit about what that means.
Adopt the budget.
Adopt the budget. What did I say? Agenda? Sorry.
Yes.
I did that too.
We're asking the board tonight to adopt the budget. That's what this is what that means. Number one is that an adoption represents that we have an acceptance of the revenue and enrollment projections. And so we know that they may change, but it's just a preview of what we think they're going to look like. An authorization of the total allowable costs, identification of a wide-ranging district spending initiatives of the board. So it's to give us a general idea of where those areas are going to be. It certainly identifies decisions made by the superintendent and staff, and it's a balancing tool. Our budget has to be balanced by the end of the year. But the budget, we want you to remember this. It's just a policy document. It is not set in stone tonight and says, thou shalt not change it. That's not true. It can be fluid as a plan, and it can expend and it can look differently. It's not a doctrine. And so what that means is that it's adaptable to the changing needs that are present during the year. And so for those of you that still have a concern and you want to be heard on it, Rosalind, I want you to listen today because Rosalind, we thought about it and we sat down and Rosalind's team put together a kind of a survey form that we think will allow you to make sure that you get those needs met. So thank you, Rosalind, for attending to that work. Thank you for Director Leon, and I know Director Hines talked about it. Thank you for bringing that up so we can address that and make sure it's right. Thank you. Rosalind.
Thank you so much. And I just want to briefly discuss some of our best practices. We've worked really hard to align to best practices. We're not all the way there yet. There's always room for growth, and I'm sure that as we continue progressing through for many years to come, there will be room for growth as opportunities change. But we have been following the Government Finance Officers Association best practices and school district budgeting presentation guidelines. So what they do is they've prepared a many-page document that talks through what are best practices around school district budgeting. And these are a few things that we've identified as it relates to communication specifically. There are really tens of types of opportunities with which we can align to best practice, but these are specifically focused around communication. So the first thing that I've included here is a communication of the issues. We worked through public testimony, we worked through work sessions, we did surveys, websites, news, and email in order to try and get the message out around what our issues really were as it relates to this budget. One best practice is a budget simulation, and we were asked to perform that this year, but we couldn't find an appropriate tool that allowed us to do that. Incidentally, we happened upon a tool maybe 2 or 3 months ago that I think we will be able to use in an amazing way for the 2021 development, but it won't be available for the current year. We use funding formulas. And the way that we allocate all of our teacher staff, not all of our teacher staff, but the majority of our teacher staff, as well as we use funding formulas for the development of our revenue. We've created an executive leadership team. Both the superintendent's cabinet and a small cluster of the superintendent's cabinet have been meeting all year since, January, all the way through on a very regular basis, talking through all of the potential decisions, talking through the ramifications and the concerns around individual reductions, what the current legislative environment looked like, and so on. We work to engage stakeholders, and we did this in a way that we've never done in the past. We created a budget advisory committee, and while we didn't have them actually making decisions, they were used for voice and input, and we actually did use those conversations as part of those cabinet conversations. We have an explanation of the decisions. Now, this is an area where it's been a little more challenging for us. We like to talk about the good and the bad. I think that we were very good at clearly articulating the issues that we were experiencing and the why around why we had to make budget reductions. The what of what we actually impacted was a little more challenging for us. And part of that is because we didn't make wholesale program eliminations and lop things out of the budget. And so we were very broad, and we will have district-wide impacts. It's hard to say specifically what those are. We're working through those as we progress through. What I do know is we have to balance our budget. We had a loss in revenues and an increase in expenditures that put us in a position where we had to make changes that won't be appropriate for everyone or acceptable to everyone, and we understand that. And so that's where this last item comes in, where we intend to gather feedback and adjust. As Carla indicated, the budget is a planning tool. We have to maintain within the expenditure authority that you give us, but we can move that money around in whatever way we feel appropriate. So at that rate, we have developed a survey and a feedback mechanism so that the public can respond to anything that they're experiencing within the budget. And I will give you just a quick preview of that. It is located on both the budget website as well as the funding website. And it's just a SurveyMonkey tool where we ask, how you're affiliated with our schools, what type of comment you would like to submit, what's on your mind as it relates to our budget. It allows us to share any specific thoughts you have around the spending priorities or reductions in the budget. And then if you have any suggestions about the way that we're going to move forward with doing anything. And finally, if you so choose, you can input a contact, and we'd be happy to reach back to you if you're interested in that. So we think that this is a great way for us to continue interacting with the public around the budget. It gives us a more aligned opportunity to see what the issues are, and then have bigger conversations at the district level and with the superintendent around how to address any of the concerns that continue to come up. Moving on from there, I want to provide you with an overview of what it is that we're requesting for board approval this evening. There is a resolution 2061 that will be presented later on in the meeting. And when we talk about the general fund budget, that's the operating budget that we use for our general expenses. Every day-to-day expense that we have is going through the general fund budget. We are going to be asking for adoption of revenues at $472,791,586. Our expenditures, we will be asking for expenditure authority of $481,980,805. That is actually a hard limit. We are not eligible to expend anything beyond those resources once you've adopted that number, without coming back to you and asking for additional authority. And then we have planned fund balance drawdown of $9,189,219. $7.3 million of that is what we are using to help save jobs and programs from additional cuts in this budget. Just to give you a quick overview of how our revenues are coming into us this year, we will be seeing state revenues of approximately $360 million. 76% of our resources will be in state resources. Our local levies will represent about 12% of our budget at about $58 million. Federal resources at $38 million will be 8% of our budget, And then local non-tax, which are generally fees and other reimbursements, that's about 2%. And then we have other revenues, which is $6.5 million, around 1.5% of our budget, for a total general fund budget of $472.8 million. When we look at the expenditures, we have certificated salaries, and certificated means that it's teachers, it's nurses, it's anybody who requires a certificate from the state to do their jobs would be paid for out of certificated salaries. That's going to represent $220.5 million, or around 46% of our budget. Benefits and payroll taxes for all of our employees will exceed $113 million. That's 23.5% of our budget. Classified salaries at $75 million is 15.5% of our budget. And when we take those three items, our certificated, classified, and benefits, we end up with 85% of our budget. So right in line with where we've been in the past. Usually we see around 85% in salaries and benefits, with 15% remaining towards other expenditures in the district. And that's actually very typical across many school districts in the state. Beyond that, we'll have contractual service expenses of about $47 million, or roughly 10%. Supplies and materials of $23.5 million, which is about 5%. And then we have a very small amount of money in equipment and travel, and that represents less than 0.5% of our budget, right around $2 million. We are required to submit a 4-year budget overview. We are not required to adhere to this budget except for the 1920 year. But the state has asked that we start submitting a 4-year budget, and so we are in compliance with that. To come up with the long-term projections, we use demographic and revenue estimates for the revenue side of things, and historical revenue trends, essentially. And then for the expenditures, we consider our known bargaining impacts and inflation expectations to try and identify where our expenditures will be. We also have other funds besides our general fund. The debt service fund is used to pay for our bond-related obligations, so interest and principal, on our debt. And that will be $57,316,738. In the associated student body, we will have expenditures planned for $4,147,642. And then in our transportation vehicle fund, we're anticipating $780,000 of expenditures. Finally, in our capital projects fund, you'll be asked tonight to approve a total expenditure amount of $125,696,000. We're also required to submit a 4-year budget for all of the other funds, and this would outline what that looks like. Again, the 1920 budget is what we will be adhering to. The other information is really for reference and as a requirement to what we submit to the state. So I just want to take, if you would allow me, a brief moment to express my extreme gratitude to all those who've participated in our budget this year. Our board members have really done an amazing job of setting out strategy and policy around our budget. The superintendent and her cabinet have done an excruciating job of making reductions and identifying where we can continue providing great service with less. Program and department leadership have done an amazing job of participating and providing feedback and input. Our Budget Advisory Committee and other citizen commentary has provided us with voice and advocacy, and our entire budget team has spent hours and hours of their lives and that they've dedicated to helping us account and balance all of these resources. And specifically, that is the director, Kristen Bell, our financial analysts, Jody Barry, Walter Buford, Denise Hall, Diane Taylor, and then finally Mary Kate Richardson is our management and operations analyst. So I want to say a deep thank you to all of you who have participated.
Thank you, Rosalyn.
Questions or comments on the presentation or on the overall budget?
So
Director Leon?
I appreciate the hard work that everyone's put in. Like as you mentioned, I won't go through the whole list, but the community has participated with in helping come up with this budget with the advisory committee, and the public comment sessions weren't as well attended as we wanted them to be, but we offered them. We tried to get people there. The constituents and the groups that were reaching out to me were more concerned about the time that they had to look at the final budget from 2 weeks ago, whether it was 10 days or 14 days until today, and then a lack of time to then bring new comments or ideas toward the board and the superintendent. So that's where those groups were concerned. And I'll mention a few of them. So there were groups of Montessori parents, nurses, the College Success Foundation, Latinx of the South Sound, the TNT interview panel with regard to discussion around a interview that I was involved with, had a lot of questions around their constituents, reaching out to them too about lack of time to review this. So I think that you've done an excellent job. Hard decisions had to be made, and I'd like to see if there are more comments tonight from the public as we digest this and think about the possibility of extending the vote, which is one idea that was proposed by several organizations, just delaying the vote is probably the right term. We can't do it in a week because a lot of critical staff members are out of town in a week and 2 weeks, and the next board meeting's not for 3 weeks. And that still is before the deadline for the state. But a lot of work has gone into this already, and if there are not significant, if it's not significant input, things that we could potentially change, we may want to go ahead and approve tonight, but I'll wait to hear from the public if there's more comments tonight. So I appreciate your hard work on this, and I do think it is a good budget, and I think that hard decisions were made. So it's not perfect for anybody, any one group.
Director Winsko.
I understand the concern, and we're here to represent the public as board members, and if people feel like they haven't had enough time to review it. But I was glad when the superintendent brought up the fact that this is a fluid document, so to speak, you know, that we add teachers, you know, within the budget. We respond to programs throughout the year. So that was, I'm glad that you said that. But I think there are some issues that were of particular concern to people that came at the last minute, and I'm going to just give two examples. So one is career counselors at the high school, that help students fill out applications for college. So the issue is, what are we going to do instead of that? So those are the questions that they have. And then when you look at nurses, they have been serving a certain population in our schools. That population is still there. Are we going to go out now and contract at a greater expense to fill those gaps? And I just think those are kind of the questions. So those are two of the questions that I personally have. And I think that when we do this budget in the future, we have to lay out, here's what we're going to do instead. And I don't know that is laid out in this budget. And I think that is the concern of the people out in the community.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. A couple of questions. When was the information posted to the website?
So there's been varying times that we've put certain information out, but we did talk last at the board meeting about getting something out immediately, and we did do that evening. That was posted out on the agenda. And then we supplemented that the following Monday with some additional documentation around, you know, the changes in every position to the district, as well as some other details. So it's been a progression as we work through, as to people have asked some questions, and so we've tried to respond with additional information as we've found that.
My recollection, when I first came on the board, that the budget document that we saw and that was put out to the public was the F-195, and that we've gone through quite a bit of transformation, creating a biennial budget process where we have now budgeted by priorities, where categorically it's more specific than when I first got the F-195 my first year. It was gobbledygook. Couldn't make sense of it. So can you take us down memory lane, how we've
Sure.
evolved over the last few years?
Sure, and we did use to prepare the F-195 as our only budget document. I agree with you that it is a essentially useless tool to the general public to understand what is in the budget, and it wasn't effective for trying to communicate changes. It's really a document that's used to provide information off to the states so that they can do research and analysis on what's included, and so that they can make sure that we are following, you know, certain requirements, and that's the intent behind it. It does have some information in it if you know how to use it and how to read it, and you understand codes that the accounting manual has identified for us. So in recognizing that, we have tried to put forth other documentation that puts better ease and understanding what that looks like. So when we started doing the budgeting by priorities process, we asked for people to submit budget proposals. Internal staff, department staff to submit budget proposals. And we proposed that the budget proposals are the most appropriate way to communicate the types of activities that are happening within the district. So that's what we posted out on our website. It's change in what's happened within each of those proposals so that you could see the prior year information, the future year information, and both the FTE and the discretionary allocations.
Okay. And I appreciate it. I think that we're getting better at it. We're a district that's always interested in learning. And I think if there are, I would be interested, as I've heard from a handful of people on our budgetary process, if there are examples of other districts where you think there's a better process. I think this board is receptive to future budget years, entertaining a different process. I think the challenge, particularly in this budget year with historic budget cuts and uncertainty, we were later into the budget process because of what was happening in Olympia and not knowing those direct impacts. I think the communication piece when I hear transparency, I don't know that there's anything that we've tried to bury. When I think of the pejorative use of transparency, that idea that we're trying to hide anything, if there is more detail, more specific information that we can get out, I think that this board is supportive of putting that out. And I do believe we publish the budget every year. It's a framework. That's why when you come to us on a quarterly basis, we see budgeted versus actuals. So we have our framework of a budget for a year and now for a 4-year projection. And then in real time or near real time, we get, because there is a little bit of lag time, we get updates on what's actually going on with the budget. So as we put this budget package together for next year, this is not set in stone. We have the opportunity, as circumstances change, if there's opportunities for programmatic adjustments, we can make those during the budgeted time period. We're not locked into this. This just gives us a framework to move forward for 19 and 20.
The only hard stop we have is the amount of expenditures with which we can allocate.
And we had to come back a couple of years ago
We did.
to create a little bit of wiggle room.
Right. We were trying to expend out of our fund balance, and so it was an intentional activity at that point.
Is when we get into the numbers on the spend down for the reserve, that is taking that $9 million is a couple of $1 million in carryover.
Correct.
Plus we were at 7%, and by policy we keep 5%, so that's a spend down plus the carryover.
Correct.
Okay. And I think it's important that we continue to have a healthy reserve, because when I look at the very last slide in the appendix on SEB, and that's something that I keep coming back to, I just want to make certain that I'm calculating the numbers correctly. So on slide 34, I see by benefit group and the total cost estimate and the new cost in red. Is the new cost in red additional cost absorbed by the district? And is that the delta between what the state is providing and what the actual cost is? Or can you help me understand what that number is?
That number represents what we understand the costs to be at this point in time, and those numbers are included in the budgeted expenditures. We are anticipating we will end up paying those new costs. We don't know specifically what those new costs will be, but these are our estimates, excuse me.
So that's on top of, for instance, units funded beyond state funding for 965. The state is providing $12,197,004, and we think there's going to be another, not quite 2.1 million on top of that the district will have to figure out how to absorb.
The 12.2 million represents what we currently pay for our staff, and we expect that the $2 million represents the difference between what we currently pay and what we expect to pay for that bracket of staff.
So is that
$12 million is the total expense for those 965 individuals. We expect that to be $2 million more than what we pay for those individuals currently.
Okay, so when I add it up, it's $8 million. I guess
Correct.
what I'm trying to get at is, do we need to find an
Maybe it'll be
additional
less.
$8
Maybe it'll be
million?
less and we'll all be good. But, we'll have a better understanding in the next several months as to where we will be with their sub costs as we start to really get through what the Healthcare Authority is going to expect of us, who is actually eligible, and finalizing all of those documentations. But I think that at this point, the $8 million roughly is $7 or $8 million that we've built in, puts us in position to cover a majority of the costs. It could be more, it could be less. I
So
hope it's not more.
If it shakes out that it's the $8 million,
Yes.
would we potentially need to look at using reserve fund to cover that $8 million, or cutting elsewhere in the budget?
Potentially. It's certainly a potential. I think that we would have to analyze how are we doing on our expenditures? Are we saving anywhere else in the budget that we could use to apply that towards this? Is there something that we don't need to purchase? Could we defer some expenses to help offset any additional costs that we experience? And or are our revenues coming in higher than what we anticipated, and that can cover the cost of that? And it's just an ongoing progression of monitoring and checking back.
Okay, two more questions.
Yep.
On the revenue slide, as we're dealing with budget cuts, can you explain the 5.8 million increase from the 18-19 budget? Because we're actually tens of millions of dollars less than we have had. So that may not make sense if people are hearing us talk about these significant deficits, but we're showing an increase in revenue.
This slide is in the appendix, and this is our revenue breakdown. And we did review this in our last budget presentation to the public. The 5.8 million is a collection of a number of impacts, including reduction to our local levy and local effort assistance that we knew was coming. It's not as bad as it could have been. The legislature did help us, but it still results in a loss for this year. We lost hold harmless dollars. Last year we received some one-time funds to help offset our potential losses. This year we received some again, but it was less than what we received last year. And then we got a little bit more money in special education, and we received some other funds like the implicit price deflator or SEB increases. But those revenues, generally speaking, aren't enough to offset the expenditures that come along with them.
And year over year, how much of a deficit is there with revenue?
I'm not sure I follow your question.
When we factor in the loss of levy.
Oh, what does our levy look like over a period of time?
What is the total budget cuts that we have made in the last year?
Roughly $45 million.
So we're $45 million because we have $45 million less in revenue. So as we go forward, I'm trying to get calibrated for our new normal, because we're not all of a sudden going to magically have, when you talk about the legislature being nice, but the reality is we're not going to all of a sudden have $45 million. So the cuts that we're facing this year are likely to be issues that we have to deal with moving forward. Loss of staff, loss of programs, loss of opportunity, because we have $45 million less than we've previously had.
Yes, from a financial planning perspective, we're looking at being in a deficit budgeting situation for at least the next several years. Next year we will have one-time money in hold harmless and fund balance that we will need to address as losses of revenue. We'll receive some additional revenue from our levy, but it probably will not be enough to offset the increased expenditures that we will continue to experience. And that's at least for next year. And beyond that, I believe that our maintenance expenses will likely outpace what the state is providing us in revenue increases.
Okay, my last question on expenditures, we have a $15 million increase from 2018-19. Can you give us a sense of what that's attributed to?
In the expenditures, we saw an increase in regular salary and benefit costs. Those are related to both bargaining, salary increments when I go from one step to the next step each year. Those are included in there, as well as SEB increases, $22 million. And then we made reductions to supplies and materials, contractual services, and travel to offset the difference between those.
Okay, alrighty, thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on the budget?
Just
Director Cobb?
one quick comment about the discussion around best practices. I think in addition to the best practices that are outlined in the tables, I think what I have felt through this process is that we're continuing to understand and adjust to our community's expectations around the communication related to the budget. So as we keep moving forward, I think keeping that frame in mind too, as well as the best practices for conducting the process feels right. It seems like we're hearing from the community what they expect to see, and every year we can get better at responding to that. So I appreciate the engagement and the input that we've had through the process.
Thank you.
I have one other question.
Director Winskill?
And that has to do with the extra money for small class size K-3. And I'd like to know how we're using that money. And I don't need to know it right now, but I think it's really important to know, because that's another question that's coming up from people. So,
Okay.
okay.
Right, item number 7, members of the public wishing to address the board. School board members encourage public participation. Your civil input is appreciated. If you would like to address the school board, follow these steps. Complete a citizen's request to speak card, which is located at the back of the auditorium. Submit the card to the school board secretary prior to the start of the meeting. Cards submitted after the public comment period has ended will not be considered at this session. The superintendent will call your name when it's your turn to address the school board. Please speak into the microphone. You may have up to 3 minutes to share your comments, or if there are a large number of speakers, time may be limited at the president's discretion. I believe we have 5 or 6 cards tonight, so
Yeah,
you
we
will
have a
be
few
able.
more, but we can, there's about 10.
Okay. We'll allot the full 3 minutes tonight. If you do hear somebody that speaks before you make a point, please just reiterate your support of that point rather than restating it. Superintendent.
First speaker is Holly Stewart, followed by Crystal Hartman.
Good evening. I have a couple of comments about that I'd like to put in tonight's meeting. The first is that I would encourage the school board to continue to post all board meetings as Facebook events for the coming school year. Today's meeting was the last one that was posted, and so it looks like there aren't any more school board meetings. But that we know is not true. So this is a really simple way to improve public outreach and community participation. So please continue that. The second item is also about public participation, and I would like to encourage you to provide childcare at school board meetings. This would also increase participation of the diverse families that you serve. We all have kids, that's why we're here, and so it would be great to have those. PTO meetings offer those, usually through the high school volunteers or middle school volunteers who come in and provide that service, so I know it's available as a no-cost option to the school district and would be a way to increase participation by a lot of families to come to these meetings. I also see that on the agenda tonight is about the next school bond, and we all know that we have facilities that are not safe, are not up to codes, are not adequate for kids, and our kids deserve to learn in quality environments. And we have some schools that need replacing. We also need more classrooms to meet those K-3 new class size requirements. And so I encourage you to move forward with that. And as you consider that, to think about how you can continue to build trust through open communication and transparency and improving those relationships with the community. Thank you.
Crystal Hartman will be followed by Kimi Gen. Sorry, Kimi.
Hi, so I'm here today to speak as a middle school math teacher. Last meeting, I was actually all the way over in Washington, D.C., but I wanted to support the curriculum adoption. So I was watching, and I actually watched all 3 hours. So saying what she said about posting it on Facebook, that was very helpful for being able to watch from out of state. And one of the things that bothered me once it got towards the end, towards the actual adoption, was when I think Director Leone, you asked about the all 8th graders taking algebra. And I went back and rewatched it to make sure I had what Mr. Garcia's response was. And he specifically stated, not all of our students are required to take algebra in 8th grade. And then he went on to say that the proposed middle school adoption offers several different pathways so that there's not a one-way requirement to do it. And from my perspective as a 7th grade math teacher, that's not true. I was also on the committee that worked on the pacing guide. And for 7th grade, for 8th grade, my understanding is there's one way. The details I see about not all students being required would be two possibilities. There's the students who are on an IEP who might be in an intervention class or an LRC class, and then there's the students who are accelerated who might be bumped up and take algebra as a 7th grader and then geometry as an 8th grader. As far as I'm aware, those are the only options for our students is the path, condensed 7th, 8th grade standards in 7th grade, which I'll talk more about in a second, and then algebra in 8th grade. My biggest concern with that is those students who are 2, maybe 3 years behind. They don't qualify for an IEP, but they are nowhere close to being ready for an accelerated 7th grade curriculum. Accelerated 7th grade curriculum is what the Common Core states is accelerated, which is pretty much all 7th and 8th grade standards in 1 year. Working on the pacing guide with our new curriculum, which, by the way, I'm happy we have a curriculum. Like, really glad, I like the new curriculum, but I'm just concerned about its application for the general population of 7th graders. And that is that it goes so fast. When we first worked on it, we would need 3 additional school days to fit in all of the dates that Pearson says we need for the activities. And that's even taking out for iReady, for state testing, all of that, and we still needed 3 extra days. So we have, 7th grade at least, it's gonna be a tough year. And especially like with teachers not having experienced it, it's gonna be a tough year. So I'm just asking you to consider what it means to really push all students, especially those students who, like, and I'm talking half my class, that's 2 years behind or more. And that, it's gonna be really tough for them to keep up. So I just ask you to consider that and think about that as we move forward. Thank you.
Kimi, followed by Penny Kramer.
Good evening, Superintendent Centeno, Board of Directors. I'm going to echo what Director Leon had mentioned. I too received quite a few emails and phone calls from community folks wanting to talk about the possibility of not having the vote for this evening and having a little bit more input. However, after listening to the fact that the budget is fluid and there's opportunity for change, and the fact that there are the best practices that Rosalind just listed, I think I am safe to say as the Director of Vibrant Schools and a coalition about advocacy that I can take that message back and probably lessen some of the concerns that some of the people contacted our organization about. I also wanted to commend Rosalind and her staff for the Budget Advisory Committee process. I had an opportunity to serve on that. I did feel that through that process there was a lot of opportunity for community to have input, to set priorities, and Vibrant Schools certainly supported that process. Getting back to the comment that Director Winskill brought up, I did get several calls, emails about the concern about the career counselors, and on behalf of Vibrant Schools, we support the fact that as you go through this process, and it is fluid, that we consider looking at what the possibility is about having those career counselors to be part of the budget and those positions being saved. So my comments would have been a lot longer, but I commend you for having the proactive stance to making sure that there is the transparency that's going to be going on. I came here to justify that you needed to do that, but you set in place. And so I do want to say that on behalf of Vibrant Schools, that we continue to work with you. We are an advocacy organization. We're about eliminating disparities for students of color and students of poverty particularly, but we're about all schools. Our commitment is to every student every day, which is the commitment of Tacoma Public Schools. And from a coalition of community voices, we support what's happening, and we thank you so much for having a proactive stance that we can continue the process to have community voice. I will take on the responsibility of reporting back to the folks who contacted me. I will also take on the responsibility of making sure that they're aware of the survey that they can complete so that we can get more voices in. And on behalf of Vibrant Schools and the community organizations we represent, I thank you for your leadership.
Penny Kramer, followed by, I think it's Sonia and Matthias Burgess.
Good evening. My name is Penny Kramer, and I am a staff member and parent at Bryant Montessori. I'd like to talk about process and best practices. On Monday, June 10th, I received an email at 11:30 in the morning with no warning, no conversation, no inkling that said, you are not working at this school next year, basically. I've been moved to a different school for a 0.9 of music and a 0.1 of K3, which no one seems to know quite exactly what that is. I was given no reason. I have still, to this day, not received a reason as to why I've been moved and replaced. I asked Scott Rich. He forwarded me on, eventually from Lisa Nolan, the answers that I've received as district demographics and programmatic changes, which doesn't tell me anything. So stability is important in education, we know that. The children at Bryant in the last 10 years have had 5 principals, 5 or 6 secretaries, 4 counselors, 4 office managers, 4 librarians, 3 PE teachers, about to have a 4th, and 4 music teachers, about to have a 5th, if I am moved. The questions here is, how is this best practice? Even though music, PE, and librarians and several other staff members are CAB deployed based on demographics, being moved and replaced, even though there were 2.5 open music positions, picking and choosing who goes where without conversation, without reason, without forewarning, just because you can do something doesn't make it right. At the last May board meeting, I spoke about inequities at Bryant. And less than a month later, I was moved to a school in the North End. It's hard not to see the coincidence there. I'm an active union member, an active parent, an active staff member at Bryant, and that is where I want to be. I have 12 years of middle school experience that I will not be able to use. I built a middle school choir program. I built a middle school guitar program that I have to leave. If we're talking about supporting the whole educator, how does this support the whole educator? A child would never be moved from one class to another without warning. Why are employees treated in this way, without warning, without reason? I'm not just a number filling a slot, a 1.0 here, 1.0 there. This is my life. My children have to move schools. I have to move schools. I have to move all of my stuff. No offer of here's your pay, no reason why, just that's it. I deserve reasons, I deserve respect, and I would like to keep my job. Thank you.
Sonia, and I think it's Matthias Burgess, please. Say it again, Matthias? Matthias?
Got it right the first time.
Okay, sorry. I should stop there. Followed by Naomi Tron.
Okay. Do you want me to talk first, or would you like to talk first? Okay. We're here to support Ms. Kramer, who is obviously the teacher, music teacher at Bryant. We are very, very sad to hear that she is being moved. And it is very, very upsetting to hear that she hasn't been given a reason, or that there doesn't appear to be a clear reason why. I did email Scott Rich about this also, and was sent a form letter in response, and essentially that said, you know, why is she being moved? Because we can. That's really disappointing and feels very unfair, particularly knowing that Ms. Kramer is a vocal advocate for our school. She has taken the time, despite seeing a lot of children every week, to call me when Matthias was struggling in her class, to check with me to find out what she could do to help him succeed. Both of my children, I also have a younger one, have bonded with her at this point, despite only seeing her once a week these days. And it feels very, very difficult to accept that she is being moved with no discernible reason. And we would ask that she please be allowed to stay. And Matthias would also like to speak.
I believe it is ridiculous as well.
Okay, go ahead and say what you want to say about
Bring
it.
down the mic. Bring down the mic a little bit.
Okay.
I believe it is ridiculous as well, and her children are my friends. It's not okay. You can't just do that.
But also talk about what you like about her.
She's also a really nice teacher. She helped me when I needed it, and it's just not right.
And just lastly, I'd like to add that our kids are already facing, we're losing paraeducators at Bryant, which will be a significant change. We are losing our librarian, which will be a significant change. And to seemingly arbitrarily move another person feels really hurtful. And again, as Ms. Kramer stated, children crave and desire stability. And moving this person would be just another lack of stability for them, and so we would really like to request that she be allowed to stay. Okay.
Thank you. Naomi Tron, followed by Kanar Mon. Okay, so just make sure everybody tells us what your name is when you start, okay?
I'm Connor Mon.
Go, Connor.
It's the Tacoma Sleepyheads. We're back again. Last time there was 4, now there's 3. Yeah, but no one's leaving. We actually increased on more people helping us. Yeah, someone's sleeping right now. So we stand for starting high school at 8:30 a.m. or later. There's already support from the American pediatrics people. So I just want to get an update on the campaign. We got on the front news of the News Tribune. Yeah, it was really new and fun for us. And we got huge support from parents on Facebook, and huge hate from parents who are calling us lazy. But but you know, those parents, we had a talk. They're just trolls. They don't know what they're talking about. It's really fun. And also want to talk about, like, we're neutral on the politics that's happening between who's running and stuff. And we don't want to get, like, between that. And also, I heard that Annie Wright's changed their high school start time later. I'm really into that. That's really cool. So Annie Wright's did their research, and they changed it to better students. And I'm also aware that one of the school board members' child attends Annie Wright. Annie Wright's did it. It's pretty cool because they're in Tacoma and we're in Tacoma. So, and also the people who are behind me are V will be presenting about the economic reasons. Yeah, it's pretty risky because you don't really know how to bring us back money, but we have reasons. And Naomi will be talking about the academic reasons. We will also send the secretary our data and graphs and findings. That will be for Naomi's talk. Yeah. There you go. V can go.
Okay. So, good evening, everyone. My name is V, and I'm here to talk about economic impacts of later school start time. Since Connor already spoke and introduced, I'm not going to say anything about that. So, we're aware of the $30 million budget cut. Okay, so I just want to really push the idea that changing start times later for Tacoma is like an investment, and I have 3 step-to-step reasons on helping bring money to Tacoma's economy. First, students graduate to get higher paying jobs. Changing start times later, students will get more sleep, which will improve their academic performance in school and help students graduate high school with well education. Since they graduate with good grades, the graduate will go to college and get a high paying job. So those now adults pay more taxes that would go to Tacoma School District. Second, less car accidents in the city of Tacoma from sleep-deprived teens. Changing start times later will help students don't get tired in the morning so they can drive to school safely, since drowsy driving teen is one of the leading deaths of teenagers now. In conclusion, students will attend school safely, and a number of car accidents in the morning will lower down if the students slept more. Thirdly, parents could improve their expense costs if high school starts last. A father interview have 2 elementary students that go to bed at 7 p.m. and wakes up at 5:30 in the morning. The parents have to get to work at around 8 a.m., so they have to leave the work around 7:30, thus leaving their children at daycare. So if elementary start earlier, parents don't need to pay or not as much money for daycare as before, since they can just drop their kid after school. And I think you probably know by now, changing elementary earlier doesn't impact the student negatively, and those parents with a high schooler can bring elementary to school instead of parent. In conclusion, this district needs to implement later start times in a sustainable fashion, help bring money back to the schools and city. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Naomi Tran. I'll be explaining how changing school start times would improve academics in school. I'll be comparing Seattle and Tacoma together along with other states. Before I begin talking about the graphs and the research I've done, I'd like to state some facts to keep in mind. Seattle is currently doing better than Tacoma at attendance, grades, test scores, and overall growth. Tacoma has less students and teachers teachers with higher education levels and more experience than Seattle, but Seattle is still doing better. I found a graph about 9th grade data and the percentage of 9th graders that passed in Tacoma and Seattle. Overall, Tacoma made a 4.2% increase from 2014 to 2018, and Seattle made a 5% increase. But I'll be focusing on 2016 and 2018 because Seattle changed their times in 2017. If you can look at the data for Tacoma did grow 1.2%, but after declining 0.8% the year before. Seattle kept growing and grew a total of 2.4%, the largest growth they had during 2016 through 2018. Another graph I found was about the students' activity during the whole day during school. And, I will be focusing on Seattle's data for the first graph. You can see that the difference between 2017 and how active students were. In 2017, studies found that students in Seattle were more active during the day in the morning when they changed their start times than 2016. Now for studies out of Washington, Minnesota, the University of Minnesota did a study on high schoolers 10 to 12 measuring the average grades. It was proven that 7:30 was the worst time to start school. Tacoma High School starts at 7:30, by the way. And students had an average of a B or less. But since they changed that to later when they measured it, during 8:30, students had A minus and B for average.
Thank you. So I have a card from Ana Romo. She's not speaking? I am. You are? Okay, sorry. Ana Romo, followed by Sally Perkins.
Good evening, board members. My name is Ana Romo, and I'm here to support the Tacoma Sleeping Heads in regard to the school late start for middle school and high schools. I am here to demand to let our kids sleep. There has been plenty of studies done for several years and have demonstrated the medical advice that says that older children are more alert, later in the morning because of their internal clock tends to keep them up at night. As these kids have made their research, which I'm very proud of them, they have taken the time out of school doing extracurricular research about this, trying to help the community, not just one student in particular. What all this research tells me or has found out is that there are no demonstrable health or learning benefits to support early start times for middle or high schools. However, schools with delayed start times have shown improvements in daytime alertness and concentration, mood, behavioral control, academic achievements, including standardized test scores. See, as an adult, I wake up at 6 a.m. every morning. I shower, get ready, start driving, get to work at 7:30. I don't feel fully awake until I have had my coffee. And it has passed at least 2 hours. Within that time, I feel like I operate in autopilot mode. So what that tells me is that these kids, it's happening the same to them. They wake up, and I can assure that because I have a daughter that is going to 8th grade next year to Stewart Middle School. And I see how this is affecting her. And not only that, but it's also affecting her in her anxiety disorder. So basically, all this has been triggering more and more this disorder, which is not helping her succeed in school. And I'm basically here just to support not just the Latino or Hispanic community, but all these kids, because I want them to see them succeed in school. So in conclusion, if a 25 body of evidence shows that our kids and teens need more sleep, why do schools still start at the crack of dawn? Thank you.
Sally Perkins.
Members of the board and Superintendent Santono, I wanted to add a couple of thoughts about transparency in the budget process. Sometimes the issue is timing. And so there was a spreadsheet that came out about the budget, but it came out after the public hearing. And so if I had wanted to testify about the puts and takes I saw on the spreadsheet for FTEs and dollars for various programs, the spreadsheet was well organized. It followed your budget by priorities categories, but it wasn't available until after the public hearing. And so in a perfect world, it would have been good to have that several days in advance, so those of us who would have wanted to analyze that and come and offer comments or ask questions could have utilized the public hearing on the budget to do so. What that would have done is given you a little bit more lead time so that people wouldn't think that they had to come tonight and ask you maybe to delay approving the budget. So what I would like to suggest, one of your transparency criteria might be how far in advance do members of the public get the information so that we can participate in a meaningful way in the opportunities that you already offer us. So that'd be the first thought. The second question I had as I watched the presentation is I saw a slide that said, I think, that much of the way the revenue and expenditures are allocated within the district is done by formulas. And so my question is, are those internal formulas, are they developed internally? And are they the formulas, for example, that say a school gets this many paraprofessionals if these criteria are in place or whatever? If that is the case, then my question would be, have you analyzed the formulas to see whether they generate an equitable result in terms of the allocation of resources across the district? Some comments about equity tonight that may or may not be directly connected to that, but it would be interesting to know, do the formulas generate an equitable result, and what criteria do you use to assess what is an equitable result? It'd be really helpful to know that, and again, that would be part of the transparency process for the budget. So those are just a couple of additional ideas I'd like to add to your thought process about that, and there may be others as time goes on. Thank you.
We'll move on to item number 8 on the agenda, the consent agenda. Do you have a motion to approve?
I move approval.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries 4-0. Item number 9, Policy Matters 9.1, the second reading of Policy 3200, Rights and Responsibilities.
The General Counsel recommends the Board of Directors adopt revised Policy 3200, Rights and Responsibilities.
I'll move approval.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments? Director Cobb.
I have a comment. So I was re-looking at this proposed policy revision, and I think that the last time we updated this was 2007, so that was some time ago. And I think just some of the language that we use in the district and some of our approach to engaging with students has shifted slightly from some of the existing language that was still here that didn't get touched. And it's represented in the second half of the last paragraph. It speaks to students shall submit to the authority of staff of the schools and subject to corrective action or punishment. There's all these words in there that we've tried to work to eliminate from some of our student conduct and discipline kinds of policies. So my comment is I think that doesn't represent really where we are. And I think that the paragraph would stand, the impact of it would around defining what students' responsibilities are would be fine if the sentence or the paragraph just ended after shall pursue the required course of studies. So I would propose an amendment to the policy, or I would propose, I don't know. I propose an amendment to the policy prior to us adopting.
I think what
in
I'm
the second
hearing
reading.
is you requesting that we strike everything after course of studies.
Yes, two changes actually, that we insert an and after schools earlier in that sentence, and that we would strike everything after course of studies.
I'll second that amendment.
And so now procedurally, you take a vote on the amendment.
Okay, so we'll vote on the amendment and then we'll come back to vote on the policy.
Correct.
All right. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Are there any questions or comments about the amendment? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstention, motion carries 4-0. Now the motion on the table is to approve the amended policy, and it's been moved and seconded. Any additional questions or comments before we vote? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, abstention, motion carries 4-0.
That was awesome.
Item number 10, quarterly financial update. Presentations on the financial health of the district will be made during regular board meetings on a quarterly basis. Monthly financial statements can be found on the district website at tacomaschools.org about finance. Item number 11, curriculum and instruction. Approval of one-time purchase for supplemental K-5 mathematics manipulatives.
The Assistant Superintendent K-12 for the Deputy Superintendent on behalf of the Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning recommends the Board of Directors approve the one-time purchase of supplemental K-5 mathematics manipulatives from Hand to Mind in the amount not to exceed $300,000, including sales tax. Funding source, C&I levy funds.
Move approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries 4-0. Item number 12, business matters. 12.1, approval of 2018-2019 fixed asset inventory reconciliation for all district locations.
The Chief Financial Officer recommends that the Board of Directors approve the write-off of the assets identified as missing on the 2018-19 inventory when the books are closed for the 2018-19 fiscal year. The actual amount of the write-off will be reported to the board by January of 2020.
Move approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any questions or comments? Yeah, I have a comment. For a district of our size, I'm always amazed at the precision with which we document items. And the one question I have is, there seem to be some schools that are habitual offenders who have more problems keeping track of their items. Do we have a plan in place to address that?
This year, we have identified the schools, what happened on April, we said, sorry, excuse me. Back in March, what we indicated to the schools that couldn't find the assets and were looking to be habitual offenders, we indicated that if they could not find the assets, that we would remove that amount of money from their budget. So we are actually going to be penalizing schools that were not able to find the assets by April 1st. And then we'll be doing a journal entry after this meeting.
Okay, so so what I saw was that currently there are 567 items missing out of tens of thousands.
Correct.
So we're about 1.2%, and that number may continue to come down.
Decline.
Yes. Okay.
Correct.
Ready. Thank you. And Steve, thank you for your great work on this. I geek out on these sorts of things, and I appreciate the precision with which you've been tracking this, because all dollars matter, and those materials are not disposable. So thank you and your team for your diligence on keeping track of all of that and keeping us all accountable. Are there any other questions or comments on this item? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention?
So.
Oh, I'm sorry,
thought
did
there might have been a
I
question.
head down and I was motoring through it, Director
Question.
Cobb?
I'm sorry. I just had a last question. Looking at some of the places where the percentages are high, I don't have in my head, I can't do the math around whether the numbers were small, so these percentages look big, or if these percentages are high. A couple of the places look like it's likely that there are partners involved. And I could be wrong about that. I'm looking at Willard and CAB Annex and Asian Pacific Cultural Center. So I just wondered about those high percentages there, and if there's something related to partners in that.
I don't have anything specific off the top of my
Okay.
head. Do you have any response to that, Steve? Specific to those schools?
It's just the school assets aside, I wouldn't see it as a partner issue.
So usually the schools that have a high percentage of loss is because they're not following the policies and the procedures that we've put in place. And so it's because, we ask you to have a sheet of your assets inside your classroom or inside your door, and that you check them. And you can tell me if I'm wrong, Steve, but the places that have a high loss rate, they don't have the sheet, they don't have the documentation, they don't have the accountability. So it's mostly about failure to follow the procedures.
And I mean, I can speak to the Professional Development Center, and specifically, that's where we host all of our technology. And so after it's done in a building, it goes generally back to the PDC. And I think that is, just a function of the fact that when you have a larger population of the materials and they're missing, then that's the nature of what it looks like. Willard, I don't have a specific response to, but we can do some investigating around that and some of these higher percentages.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries 4-0. Item 12.2, approval of resolution number 2061, adopting the 2019-2020 budget.
The Chief Financial Officer recommends that the Board of Directors adopt resolution number 2061, providing for the adoption of the 2019-2020 budget.
I move approval.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments? Director Leon?
So I think it's just important that as we're about to vote on this, that everybody sees that the data has been laid out in a really kind of easy to follow manner, with the kind of expenditures by priorities, by years, by types of programs, so everybody can see that. Just the timing was hard for people to come around with, and now everybody understanding that this is a fluid budget, and people probably knew that before, but it seems very final when you pass this. So with the reassurance that we've heard today, with the feedback mechanism that you've created for the community. And I had that discussion with a couple of these folks or organizations that have brought the concerns up to me this afternoon, and they were reassured by that, and we heard reassurance here too at the mic, so I'm feeling more confident with this, yes.
Right. Any additional questions or comments? I'm looking at you, Director Cobb.
No
In
comment.
the eyes. General Counsel, I would request a roll call vote for the budget, please.
Yes, of course. The motion, yes, we already had a motion,
Been moved
so
and
we'll take the vote now. First, Vice President Hines?
I threw you a curveball. Aye.
Yeah, I was like, okay. Director Winskill?
Aye.
Director Leone?
Aye.
And Director Cobb?
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously 4-0.
All righty, thank you. Item number 13, other business. 13.1, approval of interlocal agreement for Clover Park Firwood Day School for 2019 and 2020.
The Assistant Superintendent, K-12 support for the Deputy Superintendent on behalf of the Directors of Student Services recommends that the Board of Directors approves the interlocal agreement for Clover Park School District Firwood Day School for the 2019-20 school year. Funding source, special education funds.
Move approval.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries 4-0. 13.2, approval of interlocal agreement with Columbia Virtual Academy.
The Assistant Superintendent for the Deputy Superintendent on behalf of the Director of the Data Assessment Research Team, DART, recommends that the Board of Directors approve the interlocal agreement with Columbia Virtual Academy, CVA, for the 2019-2020 school year.
Move approval.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries 4-0. Item 13.3, approval of the interlocal agreement with Puget Sound ESD for the Relife School 2019-2020 school year.
The Assistant Superintendent K-12 for the Deputy Superintendent on behalf of the Directors of Student Services recommends that the Board of Directors approves the interlocal agreement with Puget Sound ESD for Relife School for the 2019-20 school year. Funding source, special education funds.
Move approval.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries 4-0. Item 14, report to the board. 14.1, 2020 bond package proposal. Superintendent Santorno.
Yes, I'm glad to have Mr. Morris Aldridge and Chris here to support, to talk about the details of the proposed bond package. I want to take just a moment to acknowledge a few things. Number one, I want to make sure that our public knows that we appreciate our voters. They've been here for Tacoma's children, showing their support. They've approved our bonds and levies that help us do so much of our critical work. If it wasn't for the voters that we have, we wouldn't have up-to-date neighborhood schools and money for building improvements that keep all of our students achieving to their fullest potential. We appreciate you, our voters, and we thank you. One of the things we get so many times is when our visitors come to Tacoma, they talk about the high quality of our schools. And we've certainly heard tonight, I don't want to disparage those parents that came and talked about, we still have schools that need work, but for the most part, we have schools that are that look really, really well. So today you get to get the first look at our new bond proposal, and it will show the priority of the next group of buildings that really need to be replaced, and which of those schools just need to have some work done to help teachers and students be safe and comfortable. And when we settle on all the details of the package, and it will be a process, we'll ask our voters to renew their commitment to a bond and ask them to show, as they have in the past, that we really care about every child in every neighborhood. Because one of the things you'll find in this proposal is that it doesn't matter about demographics or where you live or economic. We want to make sure we have an excellent learning environment in all of our schools. And so when our team developed this bond proposal, one of the priorities was equitable learning environments. And so you'll see that we have the bond touching all different areas of our city. This bond is the first one. I'm excited about this. I know the board is that it provides for up-to-date security and safety improvements for all of our schools. It will provide controlled access and security cameras so that teachers and students can really focus on teaching and learning. We know that that is a big first step. And then finally, for schools that aren't going to be replaced, there are some that just need improvements to bring them up. Many of our schools have really good bones, but they need some work. And so some of those things are like new roofs or new boilers. I remember the first time I learned what the UNIVAC system was, right? HVAC system. Sorry, all right, I almost got it. HVAC system was. And so it'll make some of those updates and to help make our schools impressive places to learn. And so on the face of this, it seems like, you know, when you pass a bond that it's all about buildings and it's about mortar and bricks, but this is really about providing really good learning environments and investing in our students. And so based on the way we have opened with the funding from 2013 voter approved construction bond, I think you can see that we've done a good job for providing these safe, healthy, up-to-date, aligned with instruction learning environments, and we want to continue that. So thank you for the work that you've done. I know you've done thousands of hours of assessment and deciding what the best new things are, and we're excited to hear about the work you've done. Thank you. Mr. Aldridge?
Just want to add on to the superintendent's comments. We just want to ensure the public understands that this is a preliminary bond package.
Preliminary.
There will be future study sessions and community engagements to get the much needed feedback. So with that said, we understand what's being presented tonight will potentially change based on that feedback.
Thank you. That's important to remember. This is the first pass. Morris.
Thank you, Superintendent Santorno, members of the board. We've got our, let me change our slide here. Our agenda for tonight, looking at what our bond goals are, high level of the bond development process, talking about the replacement schools and some of the things that are coming there, along with some of the other capital work. How the budget itself, we're looking at structuring that so that we can overall meet the needs of the packages that we put together, because we do not want to leave anything out as we start to move forward. The package itself that we're looking at is $535 million. So when we start talking about our 2020 construction bond, as Superintendent Santorno said, part of what we're doing is making sure that when we look at our building and learning environments, that is one that is conducive to all of our students doing well, regardless of where they are within the city. To follow up on that as well is safety and security. If you're not in a safe environment, as a former teacher and campus administrator, I can tell you that when you don't have to be concerned about those things, there's so much more that you can do on a campus. And as we went through and developed this, we used the data from a facilities assessment that we paid a third-party company to come in and do, but we also looked at geographical equity within the city as well. So there, as we spread things out, we put everything up on our city maps, looking within our regions to make sure that we were being as fair as we possible to all of the students within Tacoma Public Schools. And as we move forward with this, part of what we're been charged to do, and this is part of the board's goals when we look at our inclusion goals. We have, over the last 3 projects especially, emphasized making sure that we are engaging our local businesses, looking at our minority participation, our women participation, small business, local, and apprenticeships. The board's goals for that are 10% for minority businesses. We've got 3 projects right now that exceed that, 2 that have doubled it. Looking at our grant building, we've got Corsmo working on that. On the minority side, we're at 23.7%. On our Bose project, our minority participation is 26.3%. We are exceeding our SBE, and we're also exceeding all of our local requirements. The area that we will have to continue to work on is engaging our women-owned businesses within the city and within the county. We have not met those. I'm going to tell you that up front. But that is a focus that we will be on, and engaging our community to make sure we bring those folks to the table as much as we possibly can. Part of what we're doing now is that we're actually, on both of those projects, we have companies that did not necessarily meet the bonding capacity, but our partner in Corsmo Construction has brought them on, covering their bonding piece to make sure that we have some additional woman-owned business participation. So we realize we're at a deficit there, but it's one that we look forward to exceeding as we start to move forward. And then lastly, looking at building our pathways for our young adults on our apprenticeships, I will tell you we exceed all of our goals on those. Looking at how the packages were developed, again, looking at the facilities condition assessment that was done by Cezanne, that was presented to us, that took a little over a year for that to occur. We took that information in. After that, we had a team of folks on our facility side that went through, met with them to verify the information, and then we actually walked some of the buildings that were being recommended to be replaced. We've also engaged both internal and external stakeholders. And when I'm talking about our external stakeholders, we're talking about Metro Parks, we're talking about the Y, we're talking about the Boys and Girls Club. They've got programs that are on our campuses or right next to our campuses, as we do with Downing, as we do up in the Lincoln area, where we've got some things there that we're going to be able to do. But we're trying to make sure that we maximize our taxpayer dollars as much as possible to look at utilizing both our assets and theirs to better our students as we move forward. Part two, when we start looking at our budget analysis, one of the things we want to make sure of is that we've got budgets per project that would allow us to do the things that we need to do within the projects. So in looking at that, what we've done is we've engaged our major construction companies, we've engaged architectural firms, we've engaged cost estimating firms to help us come up with both our inflation and our market conditions and what they estimate those things possibly would be all the way to 2030, so that we can look at potentially what is that impact going to be on our dollars. And as we look at that, what we're saying is this: going back to 2018, if a dollar is a dollar that year, then you go down to 2025, that dollar would cost us $1.60 roughly. So as we're developing our budgets on replacement campuses especially, because that's where the major dollars are. If you take a building that would cost us, let's say $35 million in 2018, we then can use that to calculate what our cost would be in 2025. So as we develop our budgets, and depending on where our campuses are falling, those are the dollars that we would actually put in within the budget per our square foot cost is what we're looking at. And you can see there on the right side of this chart, in 2018, and this is an average of all the projects that occurred there. We were averaging $604.13 for a total project cost, not just the building cost. I want to make that clear. But if you start there and you put in those other factors, you can see how the cost goes up very quickly. We're hoping that this doesn't occur, but again, we need to plan in case it does. If it does not, then we'll keep those budgets aligned with where inflation is at that time, and we'll be able to take those additional dollars, bring it back to the board so that we can look at what those dollars could be used for to help support our students. On our major projects, we're looking at using design build versus GCCM or design bid build. What that allows us to do is, one, reduce our risk as a district. It helps us with our cost savings and time. And when we talk about that, we're looking at, once we go through a GMP process, that GMP really doesn't change because the contractor and the architect don't understand each other. Because under design build, they are working together. So if there's a change within the documents, that risk is on the contractor side, not on our side. What it means is that as we move forward, and right now we've got two projects that we're working on. One is Bose Elementary School, which is a design build project. Right now we are out of the ground, the walls are up. Our change orders would be minimum, if any at all. And honestly, at this point, it would take us wanting to enhance that building in order to do a change order. If there is a discrepancy within the documents, those two folks work it out and they move forward. So we don't have to come back and do a change order to pay the difference in that cost, as we've seen, whether it's in GCCM or definitely in the design bid build. We are focusing at this point really on functionality within our buildings and with the value that things bring to our classrooms to maximize the instructional pieces within those. And let me catch up my notes here. Starting out with district-wide safety and security, with the exception of the last three buildings that we're currently working on right now, we've got a mixture of security cameras and access throughout the district. Part of what's going to happen here is we start looking at our entryway systems. It's not designed to where everybody in the building's coming in through one door. What it is designed is that once school starts and our principals have locked the other doors, everyone will be funneled in through a main entrance with a secure vestibule so that you simply can't just walk into a building and walk in any direction that you like. If you've been to some of our campuses, you realize you can do that today. You can walk in through the front door and no one in the office can see you because of the layout of the building. By creating secure vestibules and some of the things that you're going to be able to see, folks will come into our building, go into an area that is secure, log in, and then the office will buzz them into the office area, and then they would be able to go into the area of the building that they need to go to at that. It's not denying access to anyone, it's simply controlling how folks are coming into our building at the end of the day. At the beginning, I need to do a better job than our kids did, because they did a great job. During the school day, excuse me. But you can see there what we're looking at, and this includes some intercom improvements and things like that throughout the district, so that when we're doing lockdowns, we will be able to do lockdowns remotely. We'll be able to do some things such as if a neighboring campus that's within a proximity of the other, we can put 2 campuses on lockdown. District security will be able to do that and do it easily from one central location. And also, as part of overall district safety, we're going to be working with the city to look at our safe routes to schools, because it's just important for our students to get there safely and go home safely as it is when they're on our campus. So we're also looking at a number of options, working with the city to ensure that we're doing as much as we possibly can as a district there. Now the big one, this is some of the photos that are there. As we look at our replacement and historic modernizations, we use data from our FCA to create this list along with our walkthroughs. And I do want to tell you that the list is in alpha order. It is not in order that we're proposing in any way. So when we start looking at it, the schools that are on our list currently are Bryant Montessori, Downing Elementary, Fawcett Elementary, Phase 2 of Hunt Middle School. And we include Phase 2 of Hunt Middle School on this because if we're able to pass the bond, you would actually never realize there was a Phase 2 because it would be done in concurrence with Phase 1. Lowell Elementary School replacement, Oakland High School historic modernization, Skyline Elementary, and Whittier Elementary School. We know that we've got a number of schools that are still outside of this, but as we developed this package, we had to be able to prioritize in putting our schools together and the ones that need to be replaced. And that's part of where our geographical equity came in as well, as we looked at these and put all the things that need to be done. Major improvements, our major improvement piece is part of our deferred maintenance pieces and things that were brought up during the FCA. These things range from mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and I won't necessarily go through and read all these to you right now because I think we can discuss these individually during our study sessions. But these are all campuses that need some additional work within, whether it's heating and cooling systems, plumbing, flooring, all of those things. There may also be a few that may not necessarily be identified on this list currently that will be added as well. Also on this list, you'll know Skyline Elementary is on both lists. It's listed as a replacement, and it's also listed here as getting some improvements. With Hunt Middle School becoming an active site, we definitely will need a second swing site. What a second swing site will do is will allow us to try and finish all of our major renovations, I'm sorry, not all of them, but all of our replacements prior to 2025. The further we go out with those, the more costly they're going to be. So we're going to propose that Skyline, the current building, we will keep that, do some improvements in it, and use that as a swing site to replace Hunt Middle School. On our athletic courts and fields, part of this too is where we have really reached out to our partners. And when I talk about our partners, we're talking Metro Parks, we're talking the Boys and Girls Club and the Y. We've got some things here, and I think these are extremely important when you look at the Lincoln High School upper field. There's been a plan on the books for about the last 6 to 7 years. It's one that we believe is necessary. It doesn't necessarily fall within the data, but it does fall within our equity lens when we're looking at this. So we will engage both Metro Parks and the community at large in that area in making sure that we meet the needs there in the upper field. There's been some plans. How much that changes, we don't know, but we will have a budget number that we'll make sure everyone works within. Also, some work there on the bowl itself will go on, and those are minor things, some bleacher replacements, things like that. At Mount Tahoma, one thing that and we'll need to take it off of this, is that we've got a track replacement in Mount Tahoma. That does not need to occur because the athletic department just recently spent money to get that upgraded and to where it's at. So those are dollars that can go into other projects as well. You can see there at Wilson High School, some sprinklers and a couple of new tennis courts. Mason Middle School, looking back at a track replacement, and also we'll do the artificial turf there. And one of the things I want to emphasize, and this comes as well from some of the comments that I know the board has heard from the students that have participated in middle school track about the inequity when you start looking at going from one school to the other, whether it's going to that campus or to Giadrone. We want to try and make sure that as much as possible that we're equitable throughout the city, so that our students, regardless of where they're participating in, that we're meeting the needs there. Replacing the 2 tennis courts at Browns Point Elementary that came out when we tore down the old building and then rebuilt the new one, put those in. That's been a major point of concern for the folks in that community, because that's an asset that was lost that we need to try and replace as well. Over at Stadium High School, we've got some drainage issues really underneath the bowl. It's one of those things you can't see it, but it's there, and if we don't address it, it would be more costly than what it is going to be at this point. But we've got some things there that definitely we have to do. And also, from an equity standpoint, looking at Stadium High School and them receiving a baseball and softball field. Currently, they're nomads. They play where there's availability. They practice not anywhere near their campus. So we're working with Metro Parks to put 2 fields at Peck, using the fields that are currently there, but going with artificial turf and then sharing that with Metro Parks. And then Giadrone's Middle School is looking at a track and field replacement along with artificial turf, so that their field is also equal to the other middle schools in the city. And then our small caps, again small. These are definitely dollars that are not as significant, but things that were either indicated within the FCA or some things that were indicated within our maintenance pieces that we have not been able to take care of. So I won't necessarily go through all of those, but you'll be able to see those as you kind of go through the document. And then as Superintendent Santoro mentioned, we've got some roofs and boilers. We've got some mechanical systems improvements. We're also looking at an energy conservation system that over a 5-year period should save us $3 to $4 million if it's implemented correctly, which we believe it will. Some ADA improvements that need to be done district-wide, working on elevators, including the elevator here at CAB that does move on its own sometimes. And then there's some dollars that are allocated for real estate in case we do need to do something either with transportation or with the maintenance facility.
So just want to add on to Morris's comments. When it comes to small capital projects, we've allocated a significant amount of dollars in this 2020 proposal compared to 2013. Based on the FCA data, the district has upwards of $800 million in deferred maintenance. That seems like a very large number, but it's very common for districts to have deferred maintenance logs upwards in the billions. So one of our focuses is not only just building new innovative schools, but also ensuring that we have allocated dollars to actually maintain our portfolio. So there's a significant amount of dollars towards small capital projects in this bond proposal.
This is just a basic breakdown of where the allocations are currently. As we work with the board and work with the community, we will make sure that we update our chart as far as where those dollars potentially may change. I will tell you, as we go through, we're going to make sure we get as much input as we can with presentations, and then be able to report back to the board, hopefully when we're doing a study session, and then hopefully in October when we come back to the board for an approval of a package. Any questions or comments at this time that we can?
Questions or comments? Director Winsco.
So I agree with you on all the buildings. And I think the community will totally agree on those buildings too. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the athletic things. So Lincoln Bowl and Stadium Bowl, their bathrooms are in horrible shape. So I don't know if there's any money allocated for those, but that would be nice.
Yes, there is. Yes, ma'am, there
good.
is.
Because those are so old and kind of ugly, actually. I'd love to see new bathrooms there. And I've been working on the Hunt project, And the one thing we're doing is making a track that is regulation size, which I think is good, so we can use it for a lot of other events. But my grandson was in a basketball game at Mount Tacoma several weeks ago, and I went out there, and it was really great to see. So the two gyms were being used by all these teams in the community. The field was being used by an outside track group, and there was a women's rugby team out in the field. And it'd really be nice to know how much money we make off of renting out our space for sports. Okay. And I think it's probably money well spent to develop these fields throughout our district. And I look at Hunt, that has a lot of space. And I know one of the things that we talked about in Hunt is having a track for running, or a cross-country track, because it has so much land availability. But I just think the more we build in that capacity. And then Gray, I went to Gray this last week for my grandson was in another, the old Gray. And I said, well, that school's gone, but their gymnasium is there, and they use that for basketball on the weekends, some of the outside groups. So that's really great. And it seemed to me there was something else I was going to say about facilities, but I really wanted to talk about the sports facilities and how important those are. And I just totally believe in the build. Oh, I know. I did go to Mary Lyon, which is going to open in the fall. It is an amazing, amazing building, and I was super impressed. And I hope our other buildings look as good as that one. It's going to be just a jewel for that community, and I urge other board members to go out and see it. That principal out there thought of everything, and I think when it's open in September, it's going to be, we're going to hear a lot of accolades, and we better be ready for many more people wanting to go to that school. It's going to be overcrowded as soon as they get there. Right. So, okay. That's it.
Director Leon.
So I applaud you for the key things I think that are important here for the public to hear is safety, right, and equity. Yes. And you've used that lens as you've developed this plan and presented it to us. There's a lot of details in here that you'll still work out, and the community can have input on the future analysis of cost, the equity of women and minority groups in parts of town, areas that are not as socioeconomically higher income. To make sure they have what we need, the energy efficiency. So you mentioned some other things, but so the stadium bowl, I mean, so if you don't do those improvements, that could potentially erode and collapse into the sea. So those are pretty important things to think of ahead of time. The unsafe field at Mason, the Geodrome, making sure that they have a proper place to play. So I just applaud you for that, and I think I look forward to having more discussion and input from the community. And I know that safety-wise, with the vestibules, I think it's really important in our climate that we're in. And I want to thank Director Hines. I know he's worked a lot on safety throughout the time here. So thank you.
I just have two comments.
Director Cobb.
Thank you. One is on I know that you said that the order of projects didn't speak to a timeline or anything. It was mostly alphabetized. But just and I've said this to you already, but just as buildings are sequenced, and as we think about the athletic facilities and some of the exterior spaces, as it makes sense, I think when we do have a timeline, it'd be nice to try to balance the shorter term kind of exterior projects with what might be a longer term capital building project, if it makes sense to not have to duplicate work and all of that, just to give some schools a boost on the outside before they can get the inside, just so as we think about staging moving forward. I think that's something to keep in mind. But then, two, I appreciate you making reference to the percentage dedicated to small capital projects, and I think that it's important as we move forward to keep talking about the need to allocate sufficient funds to maintaining all these facilities. When we buy a house, I know there's some standard out there about how much of your budget each year you should expect to set aside for maintenance, but who really does that? So it might not be common for us to be thinking that way, but given that these are public dollars, public facilities, and that we have these constraints around budgeting that we do, I think it's important to keep talking about the need to, even though it's not the fund money, it's the need to allocate sufficient resources to keep these facilities really looking well and functioning well for groups of students to come. So, thank you.
Thank you for your comments. A couple of comments building on Director Cobb's talking about the ordering. I think it would be valuable to release the facilities condition assessment so that we have an understanding as a board and as a community. I know my kids we just finished 10 years at Lowell, and so I got as the morning person on an almost daily basis, when are we going to finish this school? And when we did the last bond issue, there were 14 projects and Lowell was 15th. That was right at the cut line. And I think everybody believes their school is most deserving. It was helpful for me to provide some data back to those people saying, why not Lowell? Because I could show them that there were other higher priorities. So I think having the FCA released, and then to put parenthetically the last time these buildings were built or remodeled, I know that was very helpful when we put together the last bond issue, and some of them were decades and decades and decades old. I think contextually that helps. And then as we start to budget it out, I would like to see, I appreciate the work that's gone into creating an initial list. I think that the board needs to provide you with input based on feedback from the community where that cut line should be. So I feel like we've got a handful of schools that have already been identified. Great, what's below them? And then we can start to have some conversations. And I think that'll help us with the equity piece. I'd like to see this GIS mapped. We've used the GIS mapping capability in the past, and we can start to look at that. And then also the alignment with programs. So what's happening in the buildings. I think, Chris, you and your team have been very thoughtful with these projects around when you rebuild a grant that's a performing arts school. How do you build a performing arts school, and what can we bake into it, the stage and those sorts of things? I think that'll be helpful for us to have that sort of context around what sort of programs, or we have 19 innovative schools in Tacoma, so that full list of where are those programs occurring and what's occurring and what sort of resources do they need. And we have such tremendous partnership with Metro Parks especially, where we can start to coordinate and deconflict where if we need a certain amount of space. I love what we've done out with the new Gray complex, where you have really, to me, the Star Center adjacent to it, the Boys and Girls Club adjacent to it in Gray, and that understanding of what's the common space that's needed. And if you have a gym in one of these facilities, then maybe we don't need to build a gym, like the Star Center didn't put a gym in because they had access to Gray and to the Boys and Girls Club. So I think that, for us to tee up the conversation, I think this is an early start, and I appreciate you getting us going on it, because if we go out early next year, the date to approve a bond package is going to come faster than we can imagine. And I do appreciate, I was going to save this for my board comments, but I'll fold it in because I think it's relevant. Councilmember Tom's convened a meeting that city staff and Mr. Williams and Mr. Aldridge and I attended, and we talked about these sorts of issues as it relates to school traffic safety. And we've been working on these for a couple of years now, and through Councilmember Tom's leadership and the city's budget, we've been able to put more beacons in. And the conversation that we had was, how about a city ordinance that would create common definitions of what's the expected behavior for drivers in areas where kids and families gather, and what's the infrastructure necessary? Because for us, when we have to try to find these things after the fact, in good budget times, it's hard to find the money, and in terrible budget times, there just aren't many options. And so what the city is committed to do is to send their team out that looks for environmental factors that can create less safe environment. And so I appreciate seeing that. That was a change that occurred rapidly, because we just had our meeting yesterday. So thank you for the diligence to put that in, because that's a way for us to use subject matter experts to tell us things that we should be thinking about that should be included in the package for all of our schools, not just the schools going through the bond package. Absolutely. And how those lighting placements can both keep a campus safe and keep a safer route to school, or make a route safer because of lighting, because of those sorts of placements. So I think those sorts of that attention to detail, I think, matters when every dollar matters. And the city was saying, well, here's some things that we can do. I mean, there was some great brainstorming between our team and the city staff yesterday, and I just really appreciate that. I didn't see that sort of working relationship with the city when I first got on the board. And I think it's easy to just, these numbers get goofy quickly when we start to talk, $500 million, $750 million. But what I heard and saw yesterday was your willingness to engage with the city to make certain that every dollar counts and that we're thinking about all sorts of things as it relates to the safety and well-being of our students and families and their learning and their extracurriculars. So I just appreciate there's a lot of thought that's gone into this, and I thank you for it. And then the challenge for us is to really engage the community in a meaningful way in the next weeks and months to make certain that we hear from them, and then we come up with that cut line, and then Rosalind gets to get involved with the dollar amount and all of those important components. Are there any other questions or comments about the bond package? Righty, thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 15, board comments and reports. Director Cobb.
I have no report tonight.
Director Leon.
It's given, I think, enough comment as we've gone on several topics, but I think just the safety component of how we're looking at our schools, not just physically, but the social emotional learning curriculum that we've implemented, and I'm looking forward to getting rolled out through all the schools or in that process next year. And again, I applaud those students for coming and talking about safety and improved academic achievement with later start times, and that's something that we're going to evaluate and look at in a study session in the near future, we hope here. So,
Director Winsco.
Yeah, and I want to say the same thing about start time going later, because my grandchildren were both in Seattle schools when they changed the time. I think one year they did 8:30, I think the next year they went to 9. They kind of tweaked the system. But they appreciated it. Their mother and father appreciated it. So, and it worked well. So I am in support of that issue. And I also want to talk. So I was sick for the last meeting, but I did listen to all the comments from various people. And one I want to touch on right now is mathematics for middle schoolers. And I would really like to look at the passage rate for 8th graders in algebra and how it impacts high schools, to have to offer it the next year and just get the numbers, because I do think that it's difficult for some of those students. So that's something for future, this next year, to talk about.
Could I second that? I'm just really concerned about those comments, especially from teacher Crystal Hartman about that topic, so maybe we can hear more specifics about that.
Make a comment. Two, I wanted to follow up on. One, I think it's important to let our constituents know that with the bell times, it's a long time, complex procedure to change bell times. I worry that our students are coming thinking that if we hear them, we'll do it next year or the fall. We can't, because it has so many variables. And so what I want our students to know is that one of the things that our financial officer does that we do as part of a project item is that we list all the projects that we're going to do, and we talk about which ones are going to have action and which ones are going to have study and which ones are going to do research. And so our bell time, looking at bell time schedules, we've already put it on our list, and we already have Rosalind already has somebody on her team that is looking at the study. Seattle took 2 years before they were able to implement a later bell time. Hopefully it won't take us that long, because we can perhaps use some of their research. And the other thing is that because we're a smaller district, I just want to make sure that people know, because we're a smaller district, we don't have one district sports team. So it means we have to coordinate our sports with all the other districts that are around us. You can't just say, hey, by the way, we start school later, so our games are all going to be at this late time. And so there's lots of variables, and I just want people to know we're committed to doing the study and the look and to bring the data, but it's not going to happen overnight. The second thing is I thought that was important is that Dr. Garcia did at the last, and we talked about it last time, said that every 8th grader didn't have to take algebra, and he was talking about the accelerated piece, that there were students that take the accelerated math, and that they don't have to stop at the algebra. Since then, we've talked about it because all of us have experience in districts where there's different ways to approach that algebra, so that it's not a case where you take it and you flunk it, and you take it and you flunk it, and you take it and you flunk it. But instead, that there's lots of districts that have found ways to get kids into a path that's not speedy. That doesn't speed it up. So the curriculum the curriculum that we're in now does have this accelerated approach and gets kids into algebra by 8th grade. We are going to try it and then get the comments from teachers. The comments from teachers are important, and see what it looks like. What we want to make sure we do is that we don't just write off kids and say, you can't do it, you can't do it, but instead make sure that we give them every opportunity with scaffolding. There's a lot of people in the district that said there were certain kids that couldn't take AP, and they would never pass it, and they'd never do well, and we've proved that wrong. And so what we want to do is, and we have excellent math teachers that are concerned about this curriculum, and so it means that we should listen and pay attention and watch them as they teach and find out from their practice what it is. So we're committed to doing that. But I wanted to make sure that on behalf of Dr. Garcia, I said that he didn't mean that everybody was, he misspoke when he said that everybody had to take algebra.
Alrighty, thank you. And that is a nice segue. So
Andrea's raising her hand too. Just want you to know.
Here are a couple.
Awesome.
Sorry.
Okay,
Can I have
Director Leon.
just another follow-up on your point about, yes, we are a smaller district, and our goal would be also, it'd be ideal to have the whole county change their bell schedule. So I'm reaching out to other school superintendents on that topic. I don't foresee that the whole county would do this, but if we can get a few more districts to change with us, that would be really, really ideal for the health of the whole area.
Yeah, and I want to make certain, I appreciate the students coming, and I appreciate the students staying, because it's easy to come in and say your piece and to go out. So you're to be commended for sticking through the whole meeting, because you start to get a sense of all of the things that compete against one another. And to the student that said you're the trolls on social media, welcome to being an elected official. You're well on your way to being able to sit up here or serve in another elected capacity someday. Those are the challenges of the issues that we face. Because for every person that comes and tells me I should do that, I get a person that comes and tells me why it would be more inconvenient if we changed the bell schedule. So we want to have a conversation, and you're starting out the right way by bringing data to have a conversation, and then we need to refine it. But we're a little bit cart before the horse in that the board has not yet identified priorities, and I think we have created over the years an untenable dynamic where we sit up here at the end of a board meeting and we just throw out things that are important to us, and the superintendent looks down the line and tries to assess, okay, my boss is the 5 of them collectively, so is there a simple majority that feels that this is a priority? And then what don't I do? Because the list can't just continue to grow. So I think as the board, our responsibility is to identify what those priorities should be. And we now have a new tool, which is a committee of the whole. And we've not yet convened the committee of the whole, but if you'll remember from the retreat, the idea, and I've been on this for a couple of years and I'm super excited that we can finally deploy it. But the idea is that because of Open Public Meetings Act, aside from the dais or a study session, we have no formal way to have informal conversations. We can't just go out for a nice dinner. We have to publicly note it if we show up at a conference together, let alone try to get together and go have a dinner and figure out what's on each other's minds. So we now have an ability to publicly have informal conversations, and I'd like to suggest July 25th as the date that we have our first, and we can now go and check our calendars and make certain, but I'm gonna throw the gauntlet down to say July 25th. And we had envisioned that this would be about an hour, set time parameters like we've done for study sessions, but so that we get a sense of what's on one another's priority lists. And then collectively, we can provide direction to the superintendent for those things to work on. And I think then after a committee of the whole, where we identify some priorities and some things that are going to require additional research and information and conversation, I think that then can help to inform study sessions. And I would envision those study sessions including students and parents and community members. When we put the study session in place, that was because we were routinely having 3-hour board meetings, and there's a lot of important information that was coming at the end of the meeting, and just our brains were about ready to explode. So we said the third Thursday of the month we would dedicate 90 minutes. And I think the committee of the whole can help to better inform those study sessions, and then the representation at those study sessions can be broader than just people within the district, but we can start to really engage community members and students and parents and people that are being impacted. So I'm flexible on time on Thursday, 6 to 7, 5 to 6. I know we've got work and travel and those sorts of things, but I wanted to throw that out to see if there's, if we have consensus to schedule it out, and then we can figure out what the natural rhythm is. Perhaps it's once a month, we put an hour, we meet from 5 to 6 for a committee of the whole on a Thursday night where we're regularly scheduled to meet, so that it's one day with an extra hour rather than trying to have to come up with a whole other day of the month. But I see these priorities so that we can address issues like bell schedule and student discipline. And, you know, there's a handful of things that have been high priority issues that are heavy undertakings that if we're going to do it in a meaningful way, I don't want us to do a lot of things mediocre. I want us to do a few priority things extremely well. And then the benchmarks, we're going to have to figure out our benchmarks. And so I would anticipate maybe an August committee of the whole where we can start to talk about benchmarks and what are those focus areas that are important to us, so that we can have a study session, so that we can update. I think some of the benchmarks are no longer relevant. I think some of the benchmarks require additional attention. And I think that there are new benchmarks that we may want to consider adding to our data warehouse so that we're tracking things that are going to move the needle for students. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
Director Cobb?
I just wanted to make a follow-up comment about the algebra discussion. I appreciate the comments and that the issue has been raised. But as we look at it, I just want us to keep in mind a focus that's broader than just what's happening in the middle schools. The comments earlier spoke to students coming in 2 years behind and needing the additional time. So in thinking about that and thinking about what happens in high school too, I just think that we should keep a broad focus on the investments that we've made in recent years in curriculum and professional development and in interventions and supports for kids, and think forward about how those investments in people and processes and systems, how we expect them to impact how students come into middle school prepared. And then keeping in mind too is the pacing right, and then keeping in mind the impacts at high school too. So not just looking at where we are right now, but looking at kind of where we've been, the changes and investments we've made, and where we expect this to land over the course of the next several years.
I'd like to say one thing
Sure,
about
go ahead,
algebra. We did have a program, a 2-year algebra program at one time, and I don't know that it did not work. And it'd be interesting to hear from some teachers out in the community who taught in that and who could tell us, you know, whether it worked or not. So slowing it down for some might be a good idea, but there's a lot of discussion to go on that subject in the future.
Yeah. Okay, that moves us to item number 16, announcement of future board meetings. So if we could notice a committee of the whole for Thursday, the 18th of July.
25th, you said?
25th of July, pardon me.
Are you going to be here, Superintendent, that day or not? Are you
I
gonna
won't be.
You will be?
I won't be.
You will not be, okay.
But
I'll
the
make
deputy
sure Josh is
superintendent
here.
will be here, and he will have full authority. Yeah, so I think it's important for.
I don't know about
He will think that he has full authority. 6 o'clock, do we want to meet at our regular time? Is that, yes?
I can meet earlier that day if the group wants to meet earlier.
I like 5, but
I can try. I'll check.
Okay, right, so.
5 or 6.
I vote for 5. But
Let's say 5, because then if we need to change it to 6.
Yeah,
People have planned for earlier rather than later.
it should be okay.
Okay, 5 p.m., Thursday, July 25th. And then Thursday, August 22nd will be our regular business meeting for the month of August.
Can I just, as we think about the 5 p.m. hour, just if the community members, would they be having any input at that meeting, or would that
No.
be just us? Okay.
No, that is they can come. It'll be,
Okay.
it's public.
Public,
And we
right.
want them to come. We
Yeah.
want them to or tune in on Facebook Live or however you
Yeah.
view us. But that is
That-
intended for us to publicly have informal conversation, so that we're not just limited to a couple of minutes at the end of a business meeting, but we really can start to have more in-depth conversations, and we can, decide what we're going to move forward.
My only concern about 5 would be the people that can't come from work or watch from home. I mean, it's recorded, so I guess people can get to it later. So that's all.
There will be no opportunity for them to provide feedback in that moment, just like study sessions are not. You can come and we encourage people to come, but the participation from the dais or from the podium rather during business meetings. And if you get onto the website, you can always send us individually or group emails. There's opportunities to engage with us, not just on those select Thursday nights where we offer public comment. Thursday, September 12th, we'll be here at 6 p.m. for a study session.
And just a note on the agenda, I believe that one is a business meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, so it says study session, but it should be amended that would be our first business meeting of the new school year.
That's correct.
Okay, righty. Thank you. And with that, we are adjourned.
Thanks a lot.